The early morning sun stretched pale fingers across the desert sky as the camp lay quiet. A single man sat awake, beside smoldering embers, his face heavy with unspoken turmoil. The voice of God had come in the night, clear, calm, and utterly confounding. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him to me." The words still echoed like thunder in his chest. Fear clung to him like shadows, yet something greater flickered beneath it: trust. The man rose, his hands trembling as he gathered wood and a knife. His son stirred nearby, smiling, unaware of the storm raging within his father's heart. Beyond the horizon, distant mountains glowed gold in the dawn. That was where they would go, where obedience and heartbreak would meet, and where faith would be tested beyond imagination. The journey began in solemn silence, the rhythm of hooves and the crunch of sand marking their steady path. Isaac walked beside his father, his voice light and filled with innocent curiosity. He spoke of stars, of the scent of wild figs, of the mysteries of God's promises. Abraham's answers were gentle but short, each word weighed with pain. Behind them, two servants led the donkey through the dunes, unaware of the anguish ahead. As the sun climbed higher, the air shimmered like glass, and every breath grew heavy. That night, under a blanket of stars, Abraham watched his son sleep and whispered broken prayers, pleas for mercy, for strength, and for faith strong enough to follow where reason could not. On the third morning, the mountains appeared at last, blue and sharp against a pale sky. Abraham halted and turned to his servants, his voice steady yet soft. "Stay here with the donkey," he said. "The boy and I will go yonder and worship." Isaac smiled, helping his father load the wood upon his back. The servants nodded and stepped aside, watching them climb into the bright, endless expanse. Each step brought the two closer to the unknown. The air thinned and the wind whispered through the stones like a living voice, as if heaven itself watched their ascent. As they climbed, the silence between them deepened until Isaac finally spoke. "Father," he said softly, "we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering?" The question pierced Abraham's heart, yet his reply came steady and full of trembling faith. "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." The words carried weight, both hope and sorrow mingling as one. Isaac nodded, content, his innocence shining brighter than the sun overhead. The wind grew gentler then, almost reverent, as if the heavens themselves paused to listen. At the summit, Abraham built an altar of stone. His hands trembled with every rock he placed, each movement a prayer of surrender. Isaac helped eagerly, unaware of what the altar meant, stacking the wood neatly atop it. When Abraham turned, his eyes glistened with tears that refused to fall. "My son," he whispered, voice shaking. In that moment, understanding crossed Isaac's face, fear at first, then calm, and finally a quiet acceptance born of trust. The mountain wind howled softly as the father and son stood together, faith and obedience bound by love stronger than fear. The wind hushed over the mountaintop, carrying only the soft rasp of Abraham's breath. The altar stood ready, rough stones glinting under the rising sun. Isaac's eyes searched his father's face, not in fear, but in unspoken trust. Abraham's heart thundered in his chest as he reached for the rope, his hands shaking. He could not speak. Words would break him. Slowly, reverently, he bound his son, each not a tear he could not shed. Isaac lay still, his gaze steady, believing somehow that God's promise could not end this way. Above them, the sky blazed with light, golden, fierce, and silent. Even heaven seemed to hold its breath. Abraham rose to his feet, his shadow falling long across the altar. His knife, wrapped in cloth, felt impossibly heavy as he drew it from his belt. His lips moved in silent prayer. No words, only surrender. The world seemed to vanish, No birds, no breeze, no sound but the pounding of his heart. The light grew sharper, as if the heavens themselves watched this moment of impossible obedience. The blade gleamed, trembling in his grasp. He looked down one last time at his son, the son of laughter, the child of promise, and then lifted his hand toward the sky, ready to do what he could not understand, yet believed he must. Then in the stillness came a voice, a thunder of compassion cutting through the air. "Abraham! Abraham!" The old man froze mid-motion, his breath caught between life and death. "Here I am," he gasped. The voice filled the mountain, strong and merciful. "Do not lay a hand on the boy, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." The knife trembled, then fell from his hand, striking the stones with a sharp clang. Abraham collapsed beside the altar, tears pouring freely at last, his sobs mingling with relief and awe. Isaac turned his head, his young face radiant with wonder. From behind them came a sound, soft but unmistakable, a rustle in the thicket. Abraham turned and saw a ram caught by its horns among the brush. His breath caught, his knees trembled. God had provided. With trembling hands, Abraham freed the ram and lifted it toward the altar, tears of joy mingling with laughter. Isaac rose, watching as his father offered the sacrifice in thanksgiving. The scent of burning wood and offering rose into the brightening air, a symbol of mercy and faith fulfilled. Father and son stood together, their faces turned toward heaven. The impossible turned to miracle. When the smoke cleared, the mountain was still. Abraham named the place "The Lord Will Provide." He turned to Isaac and embraced him, holding his son as though he would never let go. The boy clung to his father, tears of relief and gratitude mingling on both their faces. Above them, the sky stretched wide and endless, filled with light. The promise had not been broken. It had been proven. As they descended the mountain side by side, their steps were lighter, their hearts forever changed. Faith had triumphed where fear once ruled, and love had turned the impossible into the unforgettable. As the golden morning matured into full light, the mountain shimmered with calm. Abraham stood still, his heart echoing with the memory of the voice that had stopped his hand. Gratitude swelled within him, so deep it felt like sunlight flooding his soul. He gazed at Isaac, the living promise of God's covenant, and knew the Almighty had never left them, not for a moment. The ram's sacrifice still smoldered on the altar, its smoke curling upward like a song of thanksgiving. Abraham lifted his arms toward heaven, his voice breaking as he whispered praise. "Jehovah Jireh," he said softly, "the Lord will provide." Around them, the wind shifted, gentle and warm, as if creation itself rejoiced in faith fulfilled. The two descended the mountain in silence, but it was a silence filled with peace, not fear. Each step down the rocky slope felt lighter than the climb had been. Isaac glanced up at his father often, his eyes searching for words that neither needed to speak. The servants saw them coming from afar and rushed forward, relief washing over their faces. Abraham placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder and smiled, tired but full of life. The boy laughed then, a sound clear as a spring in the desert, and Abraham's laughter joined his, the sound echoing across the valley like joy reborn. As they reached the foot of the mountain, Abraham paused and turned one last time to look at the summit where faith had faced its test. He knew this place would forever be sacred, the hill where obedience and mercy met. Isaac followed his gaze, his small hand slipping into his father's. The air felt different now, alive with promise. Abraham whispered, "The Lord will provide," repeating it as if sealing the truth into the earth itself. In that moment, both knew that every promise of God would stand firm, no matter how impossible it seemed. They journeyed homeward through the wilderness, and as the days passed, Abraham's heart grew lighter. Every sunrise reminded him of mercy. Every breath was a hymn of gratitude. Isaac walked beside him, his laughter returning, his eyes alight with questions about God's ways. Abraham answered gently, teaching him not with fear but with love. Faith, he said, is trusting that God's heart is good, even when we do not understand his plan. The boy nodded solemnly, his young heart carrying the lesson like a treasure. The desert wind sang softly through the dunes, a melody of peace. When they finally reached their tents, Sarah came running to meet them. Her eyes filled with tears of joy as she saw her son safe in his father's arms. Isaac ran to her, laughing, and she held him close, her face shining with relief. Abraham stood a moment apart, gazing toward the distant mountains. He knew the journey had changed them all forever. God had proven himself faithful once again, and Abraham's heart overflowed with peace. As the sun set, painting the sky in gold and crimson, the camp filled with laughter, the sound of faith restored, and far away, Mount Moriah stood silent, holding the memory of a test turned into triumph. That night, the desert lay quiet beneath a quilt of stars. Abraham stood outside his tent, gazing toward the distant silhouette of Mount Moriah. His heart pulsed with awe and gratitude, every beat echoing the mercy of the God who had spared his son. The voice that once commanded now returned, not in thunder, but in tenderness. Because you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will bless you. Your descendants shall be as countless as the stars in the sky. Abraham lifted his eyes to those very stars, each one a flicker of promise renewed. The cool wind carried the faint laughter of Isaac from within the tent, and tears of joy warmed the old man's cheeks. The Lord's voice filled Abraham's soul like a melody of eternity. Through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, for you have obeyed my voice. The promise wrapped around him like light, filling the night with divine peace. He fell to his knees, face to the sand, overwhelmed by the love of the one who transforms sacrifice into salvation. Above him, a shooting star streaked across the heavens, a symbol of God's everlasting covenant. Abraham whispered prayers of thanksgiving, each word a seed of faith for generations to come. At dawn, Abraham rose and gathered his household. The servants listened as he spoke softly of the Lord's mercy, his words filled with awe. God has provided, and he will always provide, he said. Isaac stood beside him, his young face glowing with quiet pride and wonder. Sarah watched them both, her eyes tender with motherly joy. Together, they prayed as the sun rose, painting the desert in pink and gold. The light touched their faces, and it felt as though heaven itself smiled upon their home. In the days that followed, Abraham often found Isaac beside him, eager to learn about faith, sacrifice, and trust. They would sit by the fire, the stars mirrored in the boy's eyes as he listened. God tested us, my son, Abraham would say, not to break us, but to strengthen what he already planted within our hearts. Isaac nodded, his spirit soaking in each word. Their laughter returned, their hearts unburdened. The memory of fear had been replaced by the sound of faith, steady, unshakable, and alive. When the time for rest came, Abraham walked once more beyond the tents, looking out over the vast expanse of land God had promised him. The stars faded as the horizon blushed with dawn. You have kept every word, O Lord, he whispered. His heart brimmed with peace, a peace that came not from understanding, but from trust. The sound of Isaac's laughter drifted from the camp, mingling with the first songs of morning birds. Abraham smiled, knowing this moment would be remembered through every generation. Faith had faced its trial, and God had proven his name true. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. The seasons turned, and the years passed softly over Abraham's camp, yet every sunrise reminded him of that mountain and the God who had spoken there. He would often rise before the dawn, his staff in hand, walking the edges of his flocks as they grazed in the cool morning light. The promise of descendants, once a dream, now glowed in his heart like an eternal flame. He watched Isaac from afar, strong and growing, laughter echoing through the tents. God had preserved the promise, and Abraham cherished it with every breath. Each sunrise felt like another whisper from heaven. I have not forgotten. One evening, as the campfire crackled low, Abraham called Isaac to his side. The boy came eagerly, the glow of the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. Do you remember that mountain, my son? Abraham asked gently. Isaac nodded, solemn and thoughtful. I remember, Father. I remember the fire, and I remember God's voice. Abraham smiled faintly, his gaze distant. That mountain will forever be a place of remembrance. It is where God proved that his promises never fail. When you grow older, tell your children, our God provides. Isaac listened quietly, his heart warmed by the truth that had shaped his father's life. That night, as the camp slept, Abraham lifted his eyes toward the heavens once more. The stars seemed brighter than ever, innumerable, vast and alive. He remembered God's promise, your descendants will be as countless as these. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. The silence of the night answered him, filled with the presence of the one who had kept his word through every trial. Abraham smiled, resting his hand over his heart. The covenant was no longer just words. It was life, breathing through every generation to come. In the morning, Isaac joined his father for their walk among the flocks. The boy asked, Father, why does God test us? Abraham's answer came soft and sure. Because love that is never tested cannot grow strong. God tests not to harm, but to reveal what he has planted within us. Isaac pondered these words as they walked among the sheep, sunlight spilling over the hills. Then, he said, smiling, God must love us very much. Abraham laughed quietly, his eyes warm. Yes, my son, more than we will ever understand. As dusk fell once more, Abraham sat outside his tent beside Sarah, watching the sky turn crimson and gold. They spoke little, for words could not capture the fullness of what they had lived. The laughter of their son echoed through the camp, mingling with the sounds of evening bells. Abraham leaned on his staff and breathed deeply, the air rich with peace. God's covenant was alive, in his heart, in his son, and in the promise of countless generations to come. As stars blossomed overhead, Abraham whispered one last prayer of thanks. The desert wind carried his voice upward, where it joined the endless chorus of faith that would never be forgotten. Years passed gently through Abraham's camp, each season carrying the memory of God's promise like wind across the sand. Isaac had grown into a strong young man, steady and kind, his heart full of wonder for the God who had once spared his life. Abraham watched him with quiet joy, knowing his legacy was no longer written in tents and herds, but in faith. Each morning the old man would rise before dawn, lifting his hands to the glowing horizon and whispering blessings over his son. The covenant had taken root, not in stone or law, but in a living heart ready to follow wherever God would lead. Abraham's camp had grown, filled with servants, shepherds, and countless flocks. Yet no wealth or possession stirred his heart as deeply as seeing Isaac's faith take shape. The boy often rose early to pray, his voice steady in the silence. Sometimes Abraham would watch from afar, smiling through tears. He saw himself in his son, not the man of doubt he once was, but the believer who had climbed Moriah and found mercy waiting at the summit. It was then Abraham understood that true inheritance was not gold, but faith, the kind that could outlive time itself. One evening, Abraham called Isaac to his side as the desert wind hummed low. My son, he said, never forget what the Lord has done for us. His promise will live through you and your children after you. Isaac's eyes shone as he nodded, his heart stirred with reverence. "I will remember, Father," he said softly, "and I will tell my children that the Lord provides." Abraham smiled, his weathered face alight with joy. The fire crackled between them, sparks rising into the night like stars, ascending back to heaven, each one a reminder of the covenant that would never fade. The years had softened Abraham's steps but sharpened his vision of God's plan. One night, as he sat outside alone, he looked toward the same heavens he had once counted and smiled. He could almost hear the laughter of future generations, the countless lives that would rise from his obedience. "So many," he whispered, eyes glistening. "So many hearts will know you." His breath mingled with the cool desert air as he closed his eyes. Peace washed over him like sunlight, though the night was deep. He knew his time was drawing near, but he feared nothing. His life had become a living altar of trust. When dawn came, Abraham blessed Isaac one final time. "Walk in his ways, my son," he said, "and the Lord will guide your steps as he guided mine." Isaac knelt, tears shining in his eyes, as Abraham laid a trembling hand upon his head. The sun rose over the hills, filling the camp with golden light. In that sacred moment, the covenant passed like a flame, from one faithful heart to another. Abraham's journey was nearly done, but his faith had become eternal, written not just in scripture, but in every heart that would believe after him. Morning spread softly across the hills, painting the tents of Abraham's camp in gold. The old patriarch lay resting, his breath slow and peaceful. Isaac sat beside him, holding his father's weathered hand. The years of wandering, of waiting, of believing, all had led to this quiet moment of fulfillment. Abraham's eyes fluttered open, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "The Lord has been faithful," he whispered. "His promise will live long after I am gone." Outside, the wind stirred the curtains of the tent, carrying the scent of the desert and the echo of prayers long answered. Isaac bowed his head, tears shining like dew, knowing his father's faith had shaped the world. As the light grew brighter, Abraham spoke one last blessing. "The Lord, who called me from my father's land, will guide you all your days. Trust him, Isaac. He will keep his covenant, and through your children the world will be blessed." His voice was soft but steady, each word a treasure carved in eternity. Isaac leaned close, his tears falling freely now. "I will, Father," he whispered. "I will never forget." A deep peace settled over them both. Abraham's hand relaxed, his breath quieted, and a faint smile lingered as he slipped gently into the arms of the one he had trusted all his life. When Abraham's spirit departed, the camp fell silent. Isaac stepped outside, the dawn wind brushing against his face. He gazed toward Mount Moriah, the mountain where faith had triumphed, and felt his father's words echo in his heart. The covenant was alive, pulsing like the rising sun across the horizon. Servants gathered quietly, their heads bowed in reverence. Isaac lifted his eyes heavenward and whispered, "The Lord has provided, and he will provide again." The wind seemed to answer, carrying Abraham's legacy beyond the camp, into the very fabric of time. Days later, Isaac buried his father beside Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. The stone marker gleamed beneath the sun. Simple, yet eternal. Isaac knelt there long, his heart heavy but strong. "You trusted God completely," he murmured. "Now I will do the same." As he rose, a gentle wind passed over the grave, whispering through the grass like a song of promise. Isaac felt peace settle deep within him. He knew his father's story was not over. It had become the beginning of every story yet to be told. As night fell, Isaac looked toward the stars. The same stars his father had once counted, and remembered the voice that had promised, "Your descendants will be as numerous as these." The heavens sparkled like countless diamonds, each one carrying the memory of faith that had changed the world. Isaac smiled through his tears, whispering, "Jehovah Jireh, the Lord provides, The stars shimmered brighter, as if heaven itself had heard. Abraham's story had not ended in sacrifice, but in a legacy that would echo through generations, reaching to every heart that dares to believe.